Hi, I'm Brett. Today we're going to give you an update on a very special car. And this car back in 1994 and 1995 behind me was actually one of the very first WRXs sold in Sydney, which was then modified and used by the Subaru dealership at some track days and promotions to encourage other people to look at this unusual new Japanese turbo four-wheel drive car that was for the first time available in Australia. Because you've got to remember, back then most of the Australian public were only ready and used to the Subaru RS Liberty turbo four-wheel drive, which was a much bigger family sedan. I remember owning one myself. I had a wagon model. So when the Impreza car came out with a turbo option, and then later on down the track they come out with the STI option, it was pretty exciting. And I was lucky to be running a workshop back then that was working on these unusual cars, because a really good rally mate of mine had a turbo Legacy RS, which was the Japanese import vehicle. The Subaru Australia bought a limited number of them in to compete in both the New South Wales Rally Championship and the Australian Rally Championship, and that of course spawned a lot of PR for Subaru Australia back then, and hence we ended up with this car. And those days we were the only Subaru specialists. In fact, we were the first Subaru specialists in Australia, and pretty proud of it, before it became cool to start modifying these fantastic new cars that were really good value for money. So I'm really pleased to give you an update today on this particular car, because it still belongs to the same owner. It's been in storage for a couple of years. He's delivered it back to us to give it a bit of a birthday. And some of the stuff you look at and you go, wow, that's really old school stuff. It's really different. Why did we do it back then? But I can look at a lot of the parts and the modifications on this car and remember actually doing them many, many years ago. And this particular car is still owned by the current owner. It's been through a whole range of different level of modifications. He used to do a lot of track days, and it's a pretty reliable car. So what we thought we'd just do is touch on some of the things that we did back then and why, and now what we're doing as far as the future updates. And make sure you stay tuned for the end of this video. I'll give you some information that you'll find very, very handy. So let's take the cover off here, and you can see this one has to slide out. I can't quite get it out. Oh, that's right, he's put this in here. Let's have a look from the other side, and you can see we've got a standard air intake, which is a K&N filter with the original factory ABS system, which goes into the turbo intake. Now you've got to remember, the later model Subarus, the turbo intake come around in between the power steering pump reservoir and the intake manifold. But on these particular models, the turbo intake goes through a 90-degree bend at the back of the inlet manifold and then into the turbo, which was an absolute nightmare when it comes to modifying the car, and even bigger nightmare when it came to putting a restrictor in for a rally car. But this car still runs a lot of those configuration. The early model Subarus had a press type header tank for the cooling system, and these were the replacement options that we were manufacturing back in those days, and that's exactly one of them there. And of course, the big popular thing in those days was going for front mount intercoolers. So you notice the handmade stainless steel pipes, which comes off the turbo here through a 90-degree bend. This is the hot side pressure pipe that goes around then through the front mount intercooler, comes back around, and you can see the intercooler in here. It's all been painted stealth black, and then comes back up behind the radiator and then back into the intake, which is running the old school cable throttle. And you remember around 2006 Subaru went to electronic throttle ECUs, and this type of cable throttle became redundant. This one here, this cable here, is actually part of the cruise control, which is buried down underneath. You see up the back here, this is a built engine, by the way. So what we did was we also designed the catch cans, which were part of the breather system, and sat up as high as they possibly could, because the bottom of that catch can then drains back down into the sump. And this engine is now connected to a 6-speed transmission, because the owner used to do a lot of track days and he wanted something better than the original 5-speed. And if you have a look around at the front, you'll notice it's also got, it later had the STI brake caliper upgrade. It's got the DBA slotted rotors with the alloy hats. And I'm trying to remember, I'd have to check, I can't remember what suspension was in it, but in those days MCA wasn't available for road cars, it was only available for rally cars. Let's just have a quick look inside. It's pretty tidy. It's running, we've just got the cover off at the moment because it's got an aftermarket ECU. It's got all the typical aftermarket gauges which were so popular in those days. runs a Turbo Smart eBoost 2 boost controller. But for the rest of it, the rest of the car is pretty original interior, and you can see how good the interior is. The guy who owns this car has always looked after it, and it is a pretty unique car as well. So there you have it. If you're wondering what happened with all these cars many, many years ago, and here we are 2018, and this car was built in 1994, you work out the sums. It's not exactly a brand new car anymore, but it's a type of car you could still reliably drive on the road and go and have a lot of fun. Might not like have the same sophistication as a current model STI, but it's certainly got some good pedigree and a lot of good history, and it brings back a lot of really good memories. So if you're wondering about who to do some mods on your Subaru and what our history is, this car gives you a pretty good example of how long we've been doing it for, and we're pretty proud that we're still looking after this particular client and he's trusting us with his car. So I mentioned earlier in our video, for technical info, make sure you check out our new website at mrttuned.com.au, and of course make some comments on this video, share it and subscribe, because we'd love to hear from you. And of course remember, we do a lot of custom tuning around Australia through our partner network, and if you've got any other information we hope we can help you with, please contact us. But for today, my name is Brett Middleton. Thanks for watching.